What's up, Internet? This is Rambling Josh, and today I want to talk a little bit about a game by the name of Blue Dragon. If you're not familiar with Blue Dragon, it's a game by a company that goes by the name of Mistwalker. Mistwalker being the company that was founded by Hironobu Sakaguchi after he left Square Enix in 2004. So Blue Dragon is the first game by this company. It was released in 2006. And the reason that I'm talking about it today is a couple of reasons. The first is I played it for the first time about a month ago. Originally, it was an Xbox 360 exclusive. It was added to the list of backwards compatible Xbox One games, which is actually one of the things that went into me actually buying an Xbox One to begin with, because I'd never played it. Not only that, it was actually also added to the eShop, so that even if you, like me, were not able to find a physical version of the game, you could just buy it online and download it, and there you go. Piece of RPG history right there on your hard drive. So that's what I did. So I played it about a month ago, and I want to talk about it. The reason I want to talk about it is because being made by the quote-unquote father of Final Fantasy, it's not that surprising that it is a fairly formulaic RPG in a good way. But it does a lot of little things to tweak that formula and has, in my opinion, a very profound effect on the overall game and, more importantly, the way the player themselves experiences that game in a way that I think a lot of people might not really realize or appreciate right off the bat. So there's a lot of very clever design decisions in this game, and I want to talk about it. Originally, this was going to be kind of more of a review style where I talk about the whole game overall. But the more I thought about what I wanted to say about this game, the more I realized what I really wanted to talk about was the class system. So that is what I'm going to do. So going into this game, I actually didn't realize it even had a class system. But pretty quickly, within like an hour or two, I found out that it does. And for anyone who is a tenured JRPG fan, it's a system that you're probably pretty familiar with right off the bat. It's very similar to the Final Fantasy style, or Final Fantasy V style system, which again is also very similar to Bravely Default, in that you've got a bunch of classes. You can set each character in your party as a different class. They level up in that class, and they learn new skills, which they can then take to other classes. So you can have a black mage casting white magic, you can have a knight who can steal, so on and so forth. And the reason I want to talk about this is because, like I said, there's a lot of little tweaks that make the Blue Dragon's interpretation of that system, in my opinion, significantly better. So this kind of system lends itself to a couple of downsides. And they basically come down to the amount of flexibility that is afforded to the player and the amount of value, or at least the amount of perceived value, in experimenting with different classes. Because, especially in Final Fantasy V, these are actually both very low. So in FF5, you have the class that a character is currently using, which basically comes with one active ability, and maybe 1, 2, 3 passive abilities at most. And then you have one open ability slot, which it could be an active ability, it could be a passive ability, but that's not a lot of options. So what ends up basically happening in this system, and is also true of Bravely Default, is that you kind of find a single ability combination that really works for the character in question, and then you kind of want to just stick with that. But what happens next? So let's say that you find an ability setup that you like. There's basically two things that can happen at this point. You can stick with it, or you can not stick with it. Pretty simple. So let's use Final Fantasy V as an example here. You may be familiar with the combination of Ranger Ninja. Ranger learns Rapid Fire, which lets you attack 4 times. Dual Wield, Ninjas learn dual wield, which lets you wield 2 weapons. So combine those 2 and you get 8 attacks. Very powerful. But then what? Well, you can choose to stick with it, like I said, and at that point, you're not getting any benefit from any of the AP that you get from enemies anymore for the rest of the game, or at least as long as you choose to stick with that class setup. So that's one whole avenue of your character's progression that you completely stalled out because you didn't want to look for other options. Okay, so but what happens if you do decide to look for other options? Because it feels really gross to completely miss out on all that AP and not learn any skills. That's the entire point of the job system. So let's say you experiment with other classes. Well, I just switched to a thief and I put on dual wield, but like I'm not doing anywhere near as much damage as I used to be. So the game has effectively punished me for changing classes in the hopes that I will eventually learn a skill that I will maybe find a use for at some point, maybe. That's kind of gross too. There isn't really a happy medium between those two. And that's kind of where the problem comes in. And Bravely Default, like I said, is a little bit better with this, because in that game, if I recall correctly, you have access to 1 active ability slot, in addition to the active ability that comes with your class innately, as well as 4 passive ability slots, although some passive abilities will take up 1 slot, some will take up 2, 3, even 4 slots. So you have a lot more flexibility, but it's still not a ton. You can take your whole ability setup and kind of just port it to another class, and it'll be more or less okay. And you're more likely to be able to use the skills that you do learn in other classes in that game, because by nature of having more slots available to you, so you're more able to mix and match. Now, how does Blue Dragon improve upon this? Is the million-dollar question here. And there's a bunch of ways. So first off, you start the game with 4 ability slots, in addition to whatever your classes have innately. But the difference between this game and Bravely Default, for one, a slot is a slot. There's no abilities that take up multiple slots, so it's always 4 abilities. But also, these abilities can be used for passive or active abilities. So let's say that you have a character and you're like, I just want this character to be able to cast all of the magic. You can do that. You've got 4 slots, you can go black magic, white magic, support magic, barrier magic, bam, that's all of them. And not only that, that also means that you're basically dedicating yourself to leveling up 4 different classes, at least. And that already is better than the situation of like the Ranger Ninja and then what? Because, well, it's 4 classes. Learning all the abilities from 4 different classes is going to take you like the entire game already. So that's a lot of like hopping back and forth between classes that you could potentially be doing that some of these other games you don't really see as much. But on the flip side, if you don't want to hop back and forth between classes, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it's important to point out. The way that this game's stats work is that you actually get more stats by leveling up the class. So let's say your character is level 30, but they are a level 20 assassin. The stats are much lower than if they were level 30, but they were a level 40 assassin. Maybe much is a little bit of a strong statement, because it's not like you can't go down to like a level 0 class, like an entirely new class, and still be effective. You very much can. But if you want to maximize your character, and you're like, I don't care about having lots and lots and lots of skills, I just really love assassins. This is exactly the stats that I want this character to have. That kind of also gets rid of the problem of, well, what happens after I learn all of the skills? Because you're going to learn all of the skills for a class by around class level 30. But you can go up to class level 99, so you can, if you're just like, yeah, I want all the attack, all the speed, then you can just keep leveling up Assassin, and you're not throwing away that progression quite the same way. So anyways, back to skill slots, because in the example of the caster who wants to use all 4 types of magic, there's one other class that you probably want to level up too, and that's the Generalist. And real quickly, this is a game that only has 9 classes. They're Swordmaster, Assassin, Monk, Guardian, Generalist, Black Magic, White Magic, Support Magic, Barrier Magic. So in this example, that's already 5 classes of the 9 that this character could potentially want to level up. And the reason the Generalist exists, the Generalist doesn't do anything on his own, but what he does do is he gives you flexibility. He's got two kinds of skills. The first is accessory slots. The other skill that Generalists give you is the skill plus X skill. So it's literally just a skill that gives you more skill slots. So you start off with 4 skill slots, like I said, and then through leveling up the Generalist, you can get a skill that gives you as many as plus 8 slots. So equip that in one of your original 4 slots, and that gives you 11 ability slots. 11. That's a lot of skills. Just think about it for a moment. 11 skills. Now, the way that Blue Dragon balances this out is that the skills that you do get, in general, they're not as powerful as something from like Final Fantasy V. But the way that this works out is that rather than having your character focus on a single overpowered ability combination, you have a lot of little things, so it's about flexibility. So this is important because, like I said, it's all about building up the role that you want your character to fulfill. And you're doing this from basically the very beginning of the game, because even the way that you unlock classes in this game goes towards this whole idea. So, in games, traditionally, you unlock classes through story progression, or potentially through side quests. And what ends up happening a lot of times is you have a lot of classes, maybe you're not sure what they all do, maybe you're not sure if it's worth investing time in a class. There's a lot of skills, but you can only equip a very small amount of them. But in this game, each character starts off with 1 or 2 classes unlocked, but you unlock classes per character, and you do it on every 10th experience level. So you get to level 10, unlock a new class. And like I said, this goes towards building the role that you want that character to fulfill. So from the very beginning of the game, you're forced to ask yourself, what do I want this character to be able to do? So let's say you have a character who starts off as a Swordmaster. You get to level 10, and it's like, okay, what do I want this character to be able to do aside from Swordmaster stuff? Well, maybe I want him to hit a little bit harder. You know who's probably good at dealing damage? That Assassin. Then maybe you get to level 20, and then you've got a bunch of Swordmaster skills, you've got a bunch of Assassin skills, and it's like, okay, what could I potentially want this character to be able to do? I want them to hit even harder. You know who sounds like they're good at hitting hard? That Monk. So you're being presented with choices constantly of what you want this character to be, rather than what combo defines this character. Your character is not your rapid fire dual wield character. Your character is, this is my damage dealer, or this is my thief who also has a little bit of support magic, or this is my all-around caster character, or this is my speedy tank. And with 11, potentially as many as 11 ability slots, you can really build a character that is ultra customized to the role that you want them to fulfill. So maybe you want a character that's like, I want a tank who they're super slow because I focus them entirely on defense, and every single thing that they do is focused on taking as little damage as possible. Or maybe you're like, I want a tank who can also heal themselves a little bit, so I'm going to take a little bit more damage, but I'm going to give them an ability that lets them heal themselves a little bit. And there's just so many different possibilities to play around with, and you're uncovering them slowly throughout the course of the game. Because like I said, there's only 9 classes. They're all pretty straightforward as far as you get things more or less what you would expect that class to be able to do. So you can tell pretty early on what path you want your characters to go down. You're more encouraged to experiment, because with 11 ability slots, swapping one ability out for another has a much smaller effect. Your potential loss is much smaller. Like in Final Fantasy V, if you give up dual wield, then it's like, well, that's your everything. Whereas in this game, in Blue Dragon, if you give up like drain attack or whatever it's called, that makes you heal yourself whenever you attack, then it's like, well, that's not as big a deal. If you spend a little bit of time in a single class, like maybe you go up to like class level 5 and you learn two skills, then it's like, that's not a huge investment, but that's potentially something that you can benefit from because you have so many slots available to you that maybe that class gives you something useful. You don't have to worry so much about, am I ever going to find a way to fit this into my character? Because nobody cares if your ranger ninja knows how to steal and knows every summon spell in the game. You're never going to give them those abilities because why would you not use rapid fire dual wield when you have that available to you? It's just so much more granular and there's so much more personality in the characters that you build. It greatly minimizes the downsides that I mentioned before, and I'm not going to say that those downsides are not there anymore. But it doesn't really come to mind any significant downsides to the system other than the fact that a lot of the abilities are kind of not super useful. But it's like, sure, just throw it on. We got so many slots, who cares? Like if you think about any of the classes in the other games that I've been talking about, say you learn 8 skills for that class in the course of mastering it, how many of those skills are you ever even going to be able to equip? You're certainly not going to be able to equip all of them at the same time. So like, are you really a master monk if there's like 7 monk abilities that you're not even using? Whereas in Blue Dragon, you can just be like, sure, just throw all of them on. We'll see what happens. Maybe I don't like the skill all that much. We can just switch it out for something later. You're rewarded for experimenting because flexibility is the name of the game. You don't even necessarily have to do a lot of like mixing and matching based on situations, because that's a lot of what I think Final Fantasy V and Bravely Default expects you to do, but it's kind of hard to do because the thing about your skills being situational is it doesn't really help you that much when you don't know what situations are coming up. It doesn't really help you until after you've failed the boss fight and it's like, oh well, obviously I need to equip this ability instead, and then whatever. So purely because this system focuses on having a large amount of smaller impact abilities, you have an infinite amount, not an infinite, but a whole lot more flexibility. Because stats are tied to your class, you don't have to worry so much about wasting your progression. Because again, the system focuses on flexibility, you don't have to worry as much about wasting your AP because you're a lot more incentivized to experiment with different classes and learn a whole bunch of a wider range of different skills. If you focus on like 1 or 2 classes for the entire game, you're potentially not even going to be able to fill up 11 skill slots. Maybe you don't even want to fill up 11 skill slots. Maybe leveling up the generalist class is not something you want to do. You would be wrong. That would be a mistake, but you could do it. And hopefully this goes to show that just a few little tweaks to the system completely changes the entire way that the player experiences that system. It can have such a profound effect, and a lot of people are not even going to realize it. But ultimately, these things work together to make what I think is the best iteration of this particular type of class system that I've ever seen. And I really appreciate how a couple of just very small, very clever choices just makes it all so much more enjoyable. And that's pretty much all I want to say about the class system in Blue Dragon. Catch you later.